There's a rule in physics so reliable, so mathematically airtight, that for decades, no one seriously considered breaking it. The rule goes like this. The more you try to fix a quantum computer, the more broken it becomes. Every time you add qubits to reduce errors, you introduce more errors than you removed. It's a feedback loop with no exit, a trap baked into the fundamental behavior of quantum mechanics itself. Physicists called it the threshold problem, and for 30 years, it stood as the single greatest barrier between quantum computers and the real world. China just broke that rule. Not with a press release, not with a roadmap. With a published experiment, peer-reviewed, replicated, and now sending shockwaves through physics labs, intelligence agencies, and defense ministries on every continent. What happened in a laboratory in Hefei, China, quietly, while most of the world was looking elsewhere, may be the most consequential development in computing since the invention of the transistor, and almost nobody outside the quantum physics community understands what it actually means. This is what it means. China's quantum program began in the shadows of Western skepticism. For most of the 2010s, the consensus in Silicon Valley and European research circles was polite but clear. China was buying its way into quantum computing, not inventing it. The country had money, state support, and ambition. What it lacked, the thinking went, was the foundational scientific depth to build something genuinely new. That assessment started crumbling in 2020, when a team at the University of Science and Technology of China, a research institution in the eastern city of Hefei, led by a physicist named Pan Jianwei, unveiled a machine called Zhuzheng. Named after an ancient Chinese mathematical text, Zhuzheng manipulated photons, particles of light, rather than the superconducting circuits used by Google and IBM. In its first demonstration, it performed a specific sampling calculation 200 trillion times faster than the world's best classical supercomputer at the time. The Western response was careful and hedged. The experiment was narrow. The speed-up was on a contrived benchmark. Zhuzheng couldn't run general algorithms. It wasn't a true threat to classical computing. These were all fair criticisms, and they were all true. But they missed the larger signal. China had built a machine capable of genuine quantum advantage from scratch, using a completely different architecture than anyone in the West had seriously pursued. And Pan Jianwei's team was just getting started. In the years that followed, the Zhuzheng series evolved at a pace that even optimistic observers found surprising. Zhuzheng 3.0 reached 255, detected photons, and claimed a quantum advantage over classical computers of 10 to the power of 16. Then, in August 2025, the team unveiled Zhuzheng 4.0, and the numbers stopped making intuitive sense. Zhuzheng 4.0 processed 3,050 simultaneous photon detection events through an 8,176-mode spatial-temporal hybrid photonic circuit. The task it performed, a form of Gaussian boson sampling, was completed in 6 microseconds. To simulate the same task on El Capitan, the most powerful classical supercomputer on Earth, owned by the U.S. Department of Energy, would take more than 10 to the power of 42 years. That number doesn't have a name in common usage. It is longer, by an incomprehensible margin, than the current age of the universe, and perhaps most remarkably, Zhuzheng Algebra 4.0 achieved this without a single drop of cryogenic coolant. While Google's and IBM's superconducting quantum processors operate near absolute zero, colder than deep space, Zhuzheng runs at room temperature, using only laser light and mirrors. The implications of that engineering choice reach far beyond the benchmark itself. Cryogenic infrastructure is one of the most significant bottlenecks in scaling quantum computers. Systems that require near absolute zero cooling need massive, expensive dilution refrigerators. They are fragile. They are slow to deploy. They cannot be miniaturized easily. A quantum computer that doesn't need all of that is, in principle, a quantum computer that can be built faster, cheaper, and at larger scale. The U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission noted in its November 2025 report that China's quantum results often lack independent verification. And that is a legitimate scientific concern. External replication of Zhuzheng 4. Zero's full results has not yet been published, but the core experiment was published in Nature, one of the world's most rigorous peer-reviewed journals. The team directly addressed the most credible classical counterclaim, a recently proposed matrix product state algorithm designed to narrow quantum advantage claims, and showed their results held. China didn't just build a machine the West said it couldn't build. It built one using a method the West largely wasn't pursuing. That is the detail that matters most. While Zhuzheng grabbed global headlines, a quieter and arguably more consequential development was unfolding on a different chip in the same laboratory. In March 2025, Pan Jianwei's team published the results of Zhuchongji 3.0, a 105-qubit superconducting quantum processor, the same basic architecture used by Google and IBM. In a benchmark test involving 83 qubits running at 32 circuit depth cycles, Zhuchongji 3. 0 completed a random circuit sampling task in a matter of seconds. Simulating that task on Frontier, the most powerful classical supercomputer in America, would require an estimated 4 billion years. For context, Google's Willow chip, unveiled in December 2024 and celebrated globally as a landmark achievement, claimed a benchmark advantage of roughly 10 to the power of 25 years over classical computation. Zhuchongji 3. 0 claimed to run its benchmark 1 million times faster than Google's comparable results. Published in physical review letters and formally reviewed by peer scientists who called it a significant upgrade, demonstrating state-of-the-art performance, the result established something that had been whispered in quantum physics circles for years but rarely stated plainly. China is not behind in the quantum computing race. In several critical dimensions, it may be ahead, but Zhuchongji 3.0 was only the opening move. In December 2025, the same team published results from Zhuchongji 3.2, a 107 qubit upgrade. And this is where the story crosses from impressive into genuinely world-altering. Zhuchongji 3.2 demonstrated quantum error correction below the fault tolerance threshold. To understand why those words matter, you need to understand the central problem that has held quantum computing back for 3 decades. Quantum computers are extraordinarily fragile machines. Their qubits, the quantum equivalent of a classical computer's binary bits, are exquisitely sensitive to any disturbance. Heat, vibration, stray electromagnetic fields, even cosmic radiation passing through the ceiling can knock a qubit out of its quantum state. This is called decoherence, and it causes computation errors. The standard solution in theory is elegant. Group multiple physical qubits together to form a single logical qubit. Use redundancy, like having multiple copies of an important document, so that if one physical qubit fails, the error can be detected and corrected without disrupting the overall computation. This is called quantum error correction. The brutal irony that tormented physicists for decades was this. Every time you tried to scale up a quantum error correcting system by adding more physical qubits, you introduced so much additional complexity. More connections, more potential failure points, more sources of noise, that the errors increased faster than the correction could keep up. You were running backward on a treadmill that accelerated the harder you ran. More qubits meant more errors. More correction meant more failure. This was the threshold problem. And crossing below that threshold, reaching the point where adding more qubits actually reduces errors rather than multiplying them, was considered the single most important unsolved engineering challenge in quantum computing. Google's Willow chip crossed that threshold first in late 2024. The physics community erupted. After 30 years, the problem that everyone said would be solved eventually had been solved. The path to fault-tolerant quantum computing was no longer theoretical. It was demonstrated. What China's Zhuchongji 3.2 did next changed the terms of the competition entirely. The Chinese team crossed the same threshold, but using a completely different method. Google's approach to suppressing the most damaging class of errors, called leakage errors, relied on additional hardware channels, direct current pulses requiring extra control wiring inside the dilution refrigerator. Effective, but expensive. It adds wiring demands, constrains chip layout, and creates a scaling problem of its own. The more qubits you add, the more wiring you need, and the more tightly packed and interference-prone the interior of the refrigerator becomes. Pan Jianwei's team, working on Zhuchongji 3.2, found a different path. They developed what they called an all-microwave control architecture. Instead of adding new hardware channels, the system uses precisely timed microwave signals, the same kind used to control the qubits in the first place, to suppress leakage errors and reset the auxiliary qubits used for error detection. No additional hardware, no extra wiring, just better software control of the hardware already present. The result, a distance 7 surface code, logical qubit, an error-correcting structure comparable in scale to Google's most advanced demonstrations, achieved without the wiring overhead that makes Google's approach harder to scale. The Chinese team demonstrated that logical error rates dropped significantly as code distance increased, confirming they had crossed the threshold and that the improvement scales in the right direction. Zhuchongji 3.2 became the second quantum processor in history to achieve below-threshold error correction. The first was American. The second is Chinese, and the Chinese version may be the one that actually scales. This distinction, all microwave control versus hardware-based control, might sound like an engineering footnote. It is not. It is potentially the difference between a quantum computer that reaches 1 million qubits in 20 years and one that reaches it in 5. The race to fault-tolerant quantum computing is not just about who has the most qubits today. It is about whose architecture can scale without the engineering becoming unmanageable. Every approach has a ceiling. Google's superconducting architecture with hardware-based leakage suppression has excellent current performance, but an increasingly complex wiring problem as qubit counts rise. IBM's architecture is powerful, but requires multi-chip configurations. With quantum communication, links to scale beyond certain sizes. Microsoft's topological approach avoids many of these problems in theory, but has not yet demonstrated the same experimental benchmarks. China's all-microwave approach, if it continues to hold under scaling, sidesteps one of the most difficult near-term engineering bottlenecks in the entire field. That is why the Zhuchangji 3.2 paper landed in physical review letters as an editor's suggestion, the journal's designation for work of exceptional importance, and why it was chosen as a cover paper. The editors understood what the result implied, even if the mainstream technology press largely did not. Meanwhile, on the measurement and control side of the equation, China has been moving just as aggressively. In June 2025, Chinese startup Quantum CTech delivered the EasyQ Engine 2.0, a superconducting quantum measurement and control system capable of supporting processors with more than 1,000 qubits. It achieves this at less than half the price of comparable Western systems. The same team is already working on a control system designed for 10,000 qubit scales. China's quantum ecosystem isn't just producing chips, it is building the full industrial stack. And perhaps most strategically, Origin Quantum, China's primary commercial quantum computing company, released Origin Pilot OS version 4.0 in February 2026, the world's first freely downloadable quantum computer operating system. Any university building a quantum processor can download and run it for free from China. In one move, Origin Quantum positioned China as the default platform provider for quantum hardware globally, the same way China became the default provider of solar panels and electric vehicle batteries, by offering the best product at the lowest price to the widest possible market. All of this, the Zhujiang photonic advantage, the Zhuchangji supremacy benchmarks, the below-threshold error correction, the all-microwave scaling path, would be remarkable even in a world of perfect geopolitical peace. We do not live in that world. The intersection of China's quantum progress with the global cryptography threat is where this story stops being about physics and starts being about power. Every government, military, bank, hospital, and private communication network in the world relies on encryption algorithms built on a specific mathematical assumption that certain computations are effectively impossible. Factoring a 2 to 8-bit RSA key into its prime components, for example, would take any classical computer longer than the heat death of the universe. Solving the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem underpinning Bitcoin and most secure internet certificates is similarly intractable. A fault-tolerant quantum computer running Peter Shor's 1994 algorithm doesn't find these problems difficult. It finds them easy, exponentially easy. For 30 years, the threat felt distant because building a fault-tolerant quantum computer capable of running Shor's algorithm at meaningful scale required, by best estimates, millions of physical qubits. No one was close. The threat was real in theory, but irrelevant in practice. Then the estimates started moving. In early 2026, Google's quantum AI team published a paper showing that a quantum computer with fewer than 1 million noisy physical qubits could factor a 2048-bit RSA key, the encryption protecting most internet banking and digital certificates, in less than a week. That alone would have been alarming. Then a separate research collaboration involving Caltech, Berkeley, and quantum startup Oratomic showed that Shor's algorithm could be implemented using as few as 10,000 to 20,000 atomic qubits, and that a system with around 26,000 qubits could crack Bitcoin's elliptic curve encryption in a matter of days. Then, in March 2026, the Advanced Quantum Technologies Institute announced an entirely new algorithm, the JVG algorithm, claiming to require 1,000 times fewer quantum resources than Shor's approach, and estimating that fewer than 5,000 qubits might be sufficient to break RSA. These papers are not Chinese, they are American and European. But their implications bear directly on China's quantum progress, because the question is no longer whether a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is possible. The question is when, and every new estimate is shorter than the last. China's Tianyin Cloud platform, launched in 2023 and now recording over 37 million visits from users in more than 60 countries, already provides public cloud access to quantum processors based on the Zhuchangji 3.0 chip. China is not waiting for fault tolerance to commercialize access to quantum hardware. It is building its user base, its algorithm libraries, and its software ecosystem right now while the hardware matures. By the time fault tolerance arrives, the infrastructure to use it will already be global. Western analysis of China's quantum program suffers from a consistent blind spot, the tendency to evaluate each individual result in isolation, rather than seeing the full architecture of what is being built. Look at the portfolio. On the superconducting side, Zhuchongji 3.00 setting a new quantum advantage benchmark, Zhuchongji 3.2 demonstrating below threshold error correction via an all-microwave pathway. On the photonic side, Jiuzhong 4.0 claiming a 10 to the 54th speedup without cryogenic cooling, published in Nature, using a new spatial-temporal hybrid encoding approach explicitly designed to defeat the best classical counterattack algorithms. On the neutral atom side, Pan Jianwei's own USTC group demonstrating a 2024 atom defect-free rubidium qubit array in August 2025, using AI-driven optical tweezers, 10 times larger than any previous record at the time. On the silicon side, the Shenzhen International Quantum Academy demonstrating in March 2026 the first universal logical gate operations on a silicon quantum processor, implementing a complete fault-tolerant error-detecting code on phosphorus donor nuclear spins. In a rational world, any one of these results would dominate years of scientific discussion. China produced all of them in roughly 12 months. This is not the output of a country buying its way into quantum computing. This is the output of a deeply integrated national program that has been cultivating quantum physics talent, building laboratory infrastructure, and funding hardware and software development at state scale for more than a decade. Pan Jianwei alone holds a position of national scientific prestige, essentially without equivalent in Western countries. Not just a professor, but a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and a principal architect of national quantum policy. The honest assessment is not that China has caught up to the West. It is that the race is genuinely competitive across multiple quantum architectures simultaneously, and that in at least one critical dimension, the pathway to scaled error correction without hardware overhead, China may have found an approach that others have not. It is also true that not everything in China's quantum claims deserves face value. Western analysts have documented a recurring pattern of quantum washing in Chinese state media. Legitimate scientific results inflated into strategic-sounding breakthroughs beyond what the underlying physics actually demonstrates. Coherence times on some Chinese superconducting systems remain below Google's best benchmarks. Origin Quantum's 2021 roadmap targeted 1,024 qubits by 2025. They reached 72. The gap between Chinese ambition and Chinese delivery exists, just as it does at Google and IBM. Roadmaps in quantum computing are aspirational everywhere, but the Zhuchongji results are peer-reviewed and reproducible. The Jiuzhong 4.0 results are published in Nature. The all-microwave error correction methodology is detailed, specific, and independently credible. The parts of China's quantum program that matter most are not press releases. They are papers. In November 2025, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission published its annual report to Congress. Among its findings, China's quantum breakthroughs often lack independent verification, and the U.S. must accelerate its own quantum program to maintain strategic advantage. 3 months later, a team at USTC published Zhuchongji 3.2's below-threshold results in Physical Review Letters, an American journal peer-reviewed by the global physics community. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of the quantum competition between China and the West. The science does not respect national borders. Research findings published in international journals are, by design, globally accessible, and yet the strategic implications of those findings, who can build the hardware, who controls the manufacturing base, who has the talent pipeline, who will own the quantum cloud infrastructure, are profoundly geopolitical. The United States recognized this years ago. DARPA's quantum program has been running for decades. The National Science Foundation has poured billions into university quantum research. The Department of Energy's quantum initiatives span 17 national laboratories. Major defense contractors have active quantum hardware programs. Export controls, specifically targeting quantum computing components, have been tightened multiple times. None of this has prevented China from crossing the threshold. It has, perhaps, affected the pace. But when the threshold is crossed, as it now has been, twice, by two different teams using two different architectures, export controls on yesterday's technology become a rearguard action. The more important competition is now in the layer above the hardware. The algorithms, the compilers, the cloud platforms, the error correction software, the user ecosystems that determine who benefits from quantum advantage when it arrives at commercial scale. Here, China's approach, open sourcing its quantum operating system, offering cloud access globally, building volume in its developer community, mirrors the strategy that made Chinese technology dominant in solar, batteries, and telecommunications. The playbook is not hidden. It is explicit. Not everyone was caught off guard. A handful of physicists, intelligence analysts, and technology strategists have been tracking China's quantum program with the seriousness it deserved for years. They gave talks at conferences where audiences were politely skeptical. They wrote reports that got filed without urgency. They pointed to Pan Jianwei's publication record, to China's investment in quantum talent pipelines, through programs like the Thousand Talents Plan, to the construction of the National Laboratory for Quantum Information Sciences in Hefei, a facility with no real equivalent in the Western world in terms of the concentration of quantum hardware, talent, and state support in a single location. The common response they received was some variation of China copies. It doesn't invent. China has money but not depth. The real breakthroughs will always come from the West. Zhuchengji 3.0, Zhuchengji 3.2, Zhuzhang 4.0, and the silicon quantum processor from Shenzhen are the definitive answer to that dismissal. What those observers understood, and what Western policy circles are still struggling to internalize, is that quantum computing is not like most technology competitions. In consumer electronics, you can watch competitors ship products, iterate on designs, and close gaps over years or decades. Quantum computing doesn't work that way. The threshold is a discontinuity. One side of it, you have a machine that is fascinating but limited. The other side, you have a machine that can, in principle, break every encrypted communication that has ever been sent. The gap between impressive quantum computer and cryptographically relevant quantum computer is being measured increasingly in years, not decades. Every below-threshold demonstration narrows that gap. Every algorithm improvement narrows it further. Every scaling milestone narrows it further still. And the competition to cross the full threshold first is no longer primarily between corporations. It is between countries, with all the urgency and all the consequences that implies. It would be dishonest to write this script without a direct accounting of uncertainty. China's quantum claims are, in several documented cases, overstated. State media routinely attributes more significance to results than the underlying science supports. The quantum washing phenomenon is real, and it creates genuine noise in the signal. The coherence times and gate fidelities of some Chinese processors lag behind Western leaders. Origin Quantum's published roadmaps have not matched delivered hardware. The Zhuzhang 4.0 result, 10 to the 54th speed up, rests on the assumption that the classical algorithms available today are the best that will ever exist. The history of the Zhuchengji and Zhuzhang series is partly a history of Chinese researchers improving classical simulation algorithms to challenge their own previous results. That process will continue. Future classical algorithms may narrow the gap claimed by Zhuzhang's 4.0. And Gaussian boson sampling, the task Zhuzhang performs, is not a general-purpose computation. It is a specific mathematical problem, chosen partly because it is one that photonic quantum systems are naturally well-suited to solve. It does not run Shor's algorithm. It does not break encryption. It demonstrates quantum advantage on a narrow class of problems, and extrapolating from that to general-purpose quantum dominance requires significant additional steps that have not yet been demonstrated. The Zhuchengji results are on firmer ground. Quantum random circuit sampling is a more general benchmark. Below-threshold error correction is a universal prerequisite for fault-tolerant quantum computing, regardless of the application. Those results have been published in top peer-reviewed journals and are accepted as genuine by the international physics community. The honest picture is this. China has made breakthroughs that are real, significant, and in some cases architecturally superior to Western approaches. China has also made claims that are exaggerated and operates a quantum PR apparatus calibrated more towards strategic signaling than scientific precision. Both things are true simultaneously. Separating them requires looking at the papers, not the press releases. Here is where the world stands right now. 2 quantum processors have crossed the threshold that was supposed to hold quantum computing back from practical reality. One is American, one is Chinese. They use different methods. The Chinese method may scale more efficiently. China has deployed multiple simultaneous quantum architectures, superconducting, photonic, neutral atom, silicon, all producing competitive results within the same 12-month period, supported by the deepest state investment in quantum infrastructure of any country on Earth. The qubit counts required to break the encryption protecting internet banking, financial systems, and global communications have been revised downward 3 times in a single year by independent research groups, none of them Chinese. The race is not against quantum computing. The race is against the gap between when fault-tolerant quantum computers arrive and when the world's digital infrastructure migrates to encryption that quantum computers cannot break. That gap has never been smaller. There is a rule that used to hold in quantum physics. More correction means more failure. The loop was supposed to be inescapable. China just showed it isn't. The question is not whether the rule has been broken. The papers confirm that it has. The question, the one that will define the next decade of geopolitics, national security, and global economic power, is what happens next, and who is ready for it. The threshold has been crossed. What's on the other side is still being written.